So Chris is passing it on to me so I can introduce him. So I'm going to go ahead and give Chris his bio, which is quite impressive, I have to say. I feel like I need to do a few more things in my life. But essentially, so Chris grew up in a socially isolated suburb of California, and this kind of rural lifestyle is what has driven Chris to essentially be who he is today. And his current professional passion is to connect people. Specifically, Chris's academic and professional interest is to establish urban public spaces that enhance the social, civic, and economic needs of a community. So during his time at the University of Georgia, Chris played a pivotal role in the community input and master planning of many small cities throughout the Southeast United States. He has been involved in a large and small temporary pedestrian installation in the U.S. and New Zealand, and he led his university department parklet installation for the annual event known as Parking Day, which is what we're all doing again this year, also led by Chris. We're leaning on his expertise. Chris graduated from the University of Georgia with a master's in environmental planning and design and another master's of landscape architecture. And prior to that, he got a bachelor's in geography from Santa Barbara and a bachelor's of anthropology from Santa Barbara as well. After graduation and prior to his current role, he worked as an urban designer in both private practice and for the city of Dunedin in New Zealand. While there, he met with practitioners all over Europe, Asia, and Australia to study their urban design practices. Through Chris's extensive research, both local and abroad, he has developed a methodology for evaluating the social effectiveness of existing urban plazas and applying those concepts to create new socially activated spaces. Since his presentations and research have been received and utilized by practitioners and academics worldwide. Currently, Chris Stebbins is our 2021 president of the San Diego Chapter of ASLA and a senior planner and designer with local firm KTUA. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to this very deserving presenter tonight, Chris Stebbins.
Wow, thank you, Brittany. I hope I live up to that. No, no, I'm just kidding. So thanks everybody for showing up. So like I said, this is the first of a lecture series for this year. It's an exciting time to talk about urban public space, not only in San Diego, but in America. This is, I'm going to address kind of like some of the local happenings that are occurring in Southern California and San Diego. But this is this presentation is more about the typology of public space, like for in terms of a full plaza, a full square, piazza, plaza space, and in promenades as well. I would include that as well. So it we first get into why they're a little bit of the history, why they're important, and a really good way of creating them with universal principles. That all human beings share that would benefit from having a plaza designed and planned a certain way. And there is, of course, some contextuality that will need to be considered as well. But it's I'll go ahead and start. And so the title of the presentation is The Need for Socially Vibrant Urban Plazas and a Method to Create Them. So I want to start off with directing you to a TED Talk put on by the principal of Bloomberg and Associates. Her name is Amanda Burden. She's also the former New York City Planning Commissioner, and during her time was responsible for several major public space projects in New York City. She's also, her mentor was William H. White, so she's a direct academic descendant from William H. White, and I'm assuming a lot of people know who he was. He was kind of like actually I'm going to refer to him a little later, but in the 70s he was doing a lot of work with public spaces. I highly recommend just looking up that in YouTube and how public spaces make cities work. It's a great, if you're not familiar with their benefits, this is a good place to start. So getting into a little bit of history. So American planners and developers in the 17th and 18th century were inspired by the city squares, public markets, and the common greens of England and Spain, a meeting ground for each American's town population. In the 19th century, things began to shift in American cities towards industrialization and residential overcrowding. So what happened, starting in Germany, but then it kind of moved across the US, especially post-World War II, is there was a response to overcrowding. Planners provided wide boulevards and landscaped public parks to urban citizens, or at least they created this ideal, kind of in a direct response to that over-industrialization and that overcrowding. So modern planners in the 20th century, led by architect and planner Le Corbusier, advocated land use patterns that included straight lines, tall buildings, wide highways, with large open areas in between. I would hope that this is starting to sound familiar, especially to some Western countries, not including Europe. This was viewed as a more rational, mechanized, and specialized approach to urban planning. So it's just a completely direct response. This is kind of like the idealistic, theoretical underpinnings of what would happen basically with the future planning of the United States. In conjunction with that, we have the growth of the suburb. So the suburb emerged after the financial boom of World War II and melded well with those modernist principles that were presented on the previous slide. Middle and working class people moved to these residential areas and acquired their own private outdoor spaces, i.e. backyards, with local leisure fields, televisions, and VCRs keeping the family at home every evening. Homeowners were no longer compelled to have the human connection that public spaces once provided, which resulted in their disappearance. So modern zoning regulations also contributed further to the loss of these social environments. So I personally grew up in suburbs here in San Diego, and this was kind of more of what's closer to my reality. It was kind of in rural San Diego, and at the time it felt very isolated. There was no public space. There was no daily neutral ground where you can informally run into your community members, and we barely knew our neighbors. So that's kind of the reality that I grew up with, and that's been a reality for the last 70 years in the suburbs across the United States. During this time, there is public life studies beginning in the 1960s. Pioneering journalists and researchers studied life in cities and their relationship to space. They argued that public life was forgotten in the planning of cities and must be rethought from the beginning. So these would include Jane Jacobs, William White, Jan Gill, and Christopher Alexander. They're all key figures in the 60s and 70s, actually 50s through 70s in public life studies. All the while we were creating these suburbs and these big freeways and highways connecting them all. These people were doing the good work of evaluating what really makes cities work in a good way. So in 1991, the sociologist Ray Oldenburg first introduced the concept known as third place, where the first place is the home, the second is the workplace, and the third being specifically sociable. Oldenburg made a compelling case for an absence of third places throughout America due to the loss of those physical spaces that host informal social interactions. He believed the loss of these social spaces contributed to loneliness, alienation, and a general decline of American society. So I was definitely part and parcel of that isolation myself. So what a third place has, it has these qualities. Neutral ground, so someplace that's neither the home or the workplace. It's a third place that people can meet and meet evenly, fully publicly accessible. A place for conversation, so it facilitates conversation. So if you've ever been to countries like Spain, especially southern Spain or Italy, or a lot of European cities, this is their social area. This is their outdoor living room where they meet with other people in the community. And so the art of conversation is very well developed in countries that have these third spaces, these third places. And it's not only plazas or outdoor spaces. It could also be taverns, bars, pubs, libraries, coffee shops. It could be the third place doesn't have to be an outdoor place, but it does have to serve as a neutral ground. And a home away from home and a place for those everyday social connections. Chronicling the loss of what he really chronicled the loss of these third places over the course of the last 70 years. So what do urban plazas do? They serve all those purposes for third place, but they also serve a wonderful purpose of building community. So here's just a couple of examples. These are both my photos from Denmark on the left and Siena on the right in Italy. And these were pretty much very flexible public spaces that would change over the course of a day. And yes, the tourists would be going to these places, but the majority, or a lot of them, would be actual everyday citizens. They don't have to be this big and spectacular. Actually, the one on the left was all locals. There was no tourists there except for me. So, these places are facilitating regular daily interactions of the locals, not so much of tourists, but tourists tend to like them too because they have to be really wonderful places. A couple more photos. These are the same piazza in Cortona, where I lived for a summer, and this is the same day. And earlier in the day, on the left side, it was outdoor seating and a full market bazaar that filled the entire piazza. On the right, there was an outdoor concert, same day. So these are flexible spaces that are not overly designed and kept relatively open, so loose furnishings can come in and out of them. And yeah, it just keeps the public life moving. So urban plazas build community. They are vital mechanisms for community building and social equity in cities worldwide. They're also major economic drivers, and I'm going to talk about that next. These can be centerpieces for development that can catalyze a lot of economic future development in that area. So I'm just going to cover a few of these benefits to the local economy. You might recognize that that's Fifth Avenue downtown, and it's as far as this photo goes, it was closed. And I'll address some of the stuff that's happening in San Diego later on in the presentation. So this is just a case study I like to point out because I used to work. I went to the University of Georgia for my graduate studies, and I worked with a lot of medium to small towns throughout Georgia. And I like this particular case study because it's an incredible success. What you see on your left was just a series of parcels that were all empty industrial lots. And now you can see what it is today. So, what it does is it kind of creates the equivalent of beachfront property in an area that wasn't necessarily before. The downtown area is actually more to the right of this photo, but this is kind of like an expansion of in a shift of the gravitational center of the downtown, and expanded it with this public space. It's kind of a combination park and square, but it does take off a lot of the boxes of a successful square. So this redevelopment was an economic boon for the downtown and community, becoming the equivalent, like I said, of beachfront property. Tax base grew tenfold from what it was doing before. And funds generated from these properties through a downtown special tax district jumped from, as you can see, from 1,000 to 5,500 per year. And that's just kind of like a larger case study. More recently, there has been a fair amount of studies in terms of just how increases in foot traffic on streets actually result in more visitations into business storefronts. And so like this quote from Bloomberg, it just shows that more consumer interest has been experienced at restaurants recently because of those street closures or a lot of these kind of temporary interventions that have been happening during the pandemic. This one's a little older, but it basically says that people-oriented streets tend to be more economically productive than auto-oriented streets. And this is more recent again. Independent restaurants are outpacing casual dining chains when it comes to in-venue visits. So just another quote about foot traffic, and it doesn't take too much research to look into this. And this is so, and we can all, we can all witness what's happening in San Diego and in cities worldwide as they've been expanding their outdoor dining experiences outside. The next logical step, of course, is to expand the public realms as well. So an opportunity here is, during this, of course, as a result of kind of like springboarding from the pandemic, but also just in general, because we have this knowledge about like what works, how public spaces can really economically activate a street as well as a district and better serve, the business community, is to connect those business owners and city officials, connect with them, and then talk about how extending the public realm will create more opportunity for those unplanned casual visits into storefronts. As opposed to the 1 or 2 private parking spaces whose cars are often driven by a single person for a single purpose. So just think about it, somebody gets in their car, they go on their one trip to go do their one thing, and they probably have no plans on going anywhere else. They're going to go around the block once or twice looking for a parking space, probably not going to even get a parking space right in front of the business that they're going to. And so it's a very different experience than a casual walk down a street. And, I'm thinking about certain neighborhoods in San Diego where people are more likely to informally walk and unplanned walk into one or more shops. And so it's just a completely different experience, and it's a different way of looking at it. Despite all this knowledge, the public life studies and all the studies in general, there has been kind of a general lack of emphasis in social landscape in some of the industry standards, particularly with the Sustainable Sites Initiative. I'm working with them right now to maybe expand upon the new version, and that is basically there's just not as much content in there for social connection as far in their entire document, and there's not as many points awarded in order to get a Sustainable Sites Initiative certification for your landscape. And what I'm talking about is with the Sustainable Sites Initiative, if maybe a little background in that, it's kind of the lead for landscapes. So maybe everybody's familiar with LEED. LEED is kind of a certification system for going platinum, gold, silver, and bronze for certain buildings. You can receive a similar certification for landscapes for us landscape architects and planners. So, but that being said, a lot of the content focuses mainly on aesthetics, passive parks, and environmental functions over human connections. So, if we've learned anything from this pandemic, is that vital human connections are very important. So to start here, into kind of like, we're kind of shifting a little bit into, how you can make successful urban plazas. What does a good urban plaza look like? And they are successful when they at least foster informal sociability, not only programmed events. So you can program any space. You can just have a calendar and keep on cramming things and people show up there. But the best plazas throughout the world are where your local citizens are walking into them, not necessarily with a plan. Maybe they do have a plan. Maybe they have several errands they want to run, but then they run into all their community members. That is literally how community is built. Jane Jacobs writes about this. She's the famous urbanist and author about how community is built, and Jan Gill actually writes about this too. It's those formal, both passive and active social connections in the public space for a particular urban community. That is literally how urban community is built, outside of just only programmed events. They are also successful if they are located in a dense residential urban area. So you don't necessarily want to locate these far away where you have to get into a car. Then it becomes a destination park. Or if it's a plaza that's far away from everything, then it becomes very vacant. Sometimes these don't get located in the most ideal location, and as a result, there are not too many people at these spaces, even if they meant well. So that's kind of a minimum requirement. And then the third one is serve the local community and not just a tourist destination. So those are the capture, the watershed of people that you want to service for these plazas are within a short walking distance, ideally. So you want that density, you know, maybe at a very minimum, our urban areas as defined by the US Census. And then talk about the local community, that you want that local user catchment, you know, what's known as the easy walking distance, you know, quarter of a mile, half a mile at the most, but ideally quarter mile. So what is an urban plaza? So let's distinguish it a little bit from a park. So less of a passive park, which is more largely characterized by turf. So urban plazas tend to be, you know, more hardscaped, less specifically for recreation, active or passive. So it's not, a plaza doesn't necessarily have spaces for basketball, you know, or handball or anything like that, or tennis. It's more of a flexible space that can take on a lot of different uses over the course of a day. Not a destination park, ideally, so where people have to get in their cars and drive to it. This is in the urban fabric, within short walking distance to the people that it serves. Less of a place to retreat or refuge, but more of social connection, which is kind of interesting because I remember when I was living in Italy how relaxing it was to sit on the edge of a plaza or on the steps looking down at a plaza, and how incredibly relaxing it was. For me, it was kind of a refuge because I could just sit there and people watch, and it was very relaxing. So, but it is intended to facilitate social connection more than just escape. So what is it? You know, those are the things that it's not. This is the things that it is. So it tends to be a majority of hardscape, definitely over 50%. You know, there's not necessarily a fixed line, but a lot of the research that I was looking at looks like at least 60% hardscape, so a majority of hardscape is dedicated to it, versus softscape. Stitched directly into the dense mixed use fabric, so not only in the urban density, but also in a mixed use fabric. So ideally you have you know, storefronts or businesses fronting this that can activate the edge, not so much residences. Great if the residences are upstairs though, because then you have those balconies where people can look down on the plaza space. And if anybody's ever been to Spain or Italy, it's pretty neat when you can see people leaning out of their windows and yelling down at people that they know. It's pretty neat. It's a neutral ground, publicly owned or fully accessible. So in the States, we have a lot of private plazas, but as long as they're fully accessible by the public, that qualifies. Hosts informal, unplanned social engagements, and both active and passive. So active meaning, you know, unplanned but also planned social engagements. And what's meant by active is that you're actually engaging in conversation. But passive, you know, it is actually a form of socialization to just people watch. It's don't take my word for it. It's actually in the research. It's in the literature, psychological literature. So it's you know, just by being there, and you are actually becoming part of the social fabric and the community. It's flexible. It can host different uses over the course of a day. So like I was showing you earlier, ideally it's not overly designed, so it can take on, and it's generally open, especially in the middle. That's one of the principles that is going to show up later in the presentation. So it can really be flexible. It can change to those different uses over the course of the day. You know, morning, you know, you got your market, then the midday you got your kids playing soccer. Early afternoon, you have your more aged residents showing up and having a little powwow and get together, which I've witnessed. That's and then later in the evening, you have all the dinner tables out, and then late in the evening, all the dinner tables are taken away where people are carousing outside. So it's really wonderful to see this happen over the course of a day. It's also a place for economic stimulation. So this is not only for community building and facilitating the art of conversation, but it's also a place that really stimulates the local economy. place for civic discourse. You can use it not only for informal conversation, but it could be a place to have your platform. You know, if you want to announce something, kind of, you know, what you see in universities sometimes. In university plazas, you see, you know, students with a megaphone or a microphone, and they're talking about whatever they feel passionate about. So it's technically a public space. It should be open for doing this kind of thing. And to build your local community. Mentioned that a few times. And adds real flavor and identity to a community. So, you know, if you ever hung out in a plaza, especially one that's ancient, you really kind of get a feeling for the local area and the people there. If you, you know, even just sit on the edge and, you know, you're at a cafe looking at, watching everybody do their thing. It's just almost like the theater. It's almost like human theater, and you it's a very unique human theater for that particular community. While I was doing a lot of this research several years ago, I kind of came across two different types of plazas, which, you know, wasn't really necessarily defined in the literature, but it seems to be pretty evident. One is the enclosed plaza, where the boundaries wall edge is defined by walls. So here's a couple of examples, and you see these mostly in Europe, almost entirely in Europe, with some exceptions in the States. You know, the one on the top right is in Poznan, Poland, and, you know, in the bottom left, that is in Greenville, South Carolina. And I've been to the one in the bottom left. It's a great, beautiful plaza, actually. And so you can see that its edges are kind of defined actually by the building facade. So that's, like I said, with exceptions, that's usually found in traditional city centers throughout Europe and less often in the United States. The second type is the perimeter block plaza. So this is defined by road, you know, surrounding, you know, it's, you know, by automobiles, you know, going around it. So I've seen these in a lot of different places. And so you basically are driving around it. In this case, the plaza is the object contained with the block rather than a building, and is surrounded by streets dominated by automobiles. And this is the type of plaza that's more common seen in contemporary urban planning, you know, as you can see in these examples. So, you know, the edge of the plaza itself is defined by street. And so, I mean, it might have a, you know, great sidewalk situation. And there's nothing, I'm not saying that one's better than the other. They're just very different types. And the application of the principles that I'm going to cover next are different depending on which type we're talking about. And sometimes it's a combination. In some situations, it's like half street edge and half, you know, defined by building facades. So you just do the treatment a little bit differently on those edges. So what I'm going to present here now, now that I've kind of given you that background, is a methodology for designing urban plazas. What I'm going to do here is present a list of design principles that evaluate the efficacy of existing, but we'll find out also that you can also use these to design urban public spaces. So, so after a massive literature review using 53 unique references, and distilling them down, finding all these cross-references between all these different references and all these citations, and basically distilling it down, it came down to 15 planning and design principles. And these are actually principles that are beyond what the Sustainable Sites Initiative outlines. They have they basically have three, whereas the research that is presented here goes well beyond what is in the minimal you know, design requirements as opposed by the Sustainable Sites Initiative. So, so I didn't want to necessarily, you know, negate those principles. This is just going well beyond it. And for the most part, these are universal. These are defined by human behavior, psychology, sociology. Some of them are contextual. It just depends on which, you know, which principle you're talking about. I'm not going to cover them all, but I think I'm going to cover 5 here. So this one is increase the number and nearness of plazas. So what's happening here is that ideally you have them within a certain distance from each other. So you don't have a plaza that's a mile or 2 away from the next one. And that doesn't it's not only restricted to plazas as well, it also includes parks. So parks and plazas really help leverage each other. They really do add value and they kind of socially build on each other when they're within a certain distance of each other. So ideally within 500 feet, but at the very most, 1,320, and that's considered a quarter mile, considered easy walking distance. And so this means you can casually step out your door and you could be at the plaza within a few minutes. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about getting in your car. We're talking about, maybe if you've ever walked around the Village in New York, you're probably really familiar with all those little pocket parks down there. That's exactly what we're talking about. So ideally, beyond those very baseline requirements that I was talking about several slides ago, these all go beyond, what those baseline requirements are. So in addition to being located in dense urban area, you want to locate it within a pedestrian network. So when you are able to measure or observe, an area that is already experiencing a lot of pedestrian activity, either adjacent or through it, then it might be a good place to locate your public space right in that area. So small plazas. So, overly huge plazas sometimes don't work. They can if they have a sense of enclosure and if the dominant building is no more than half the distance of the length of your plaza. So this sounds very specific, and that's because it is. It's coming from a lot of research in this regard. If you've ever been to the piazzas of Italy, there is always a very dominant, on one edge, a dominant cathedral or civic building, and it's very tall. And the plaza length does not tend to be too much longer than twice the length of that dominant building. And then the rest of the walls, the edges are enclosed around it, just like that type of plaza that I was talking about before, kind of like the structurally enclosed plaza. So plazas really benefit from being smaller. That's generally what this is saying. You don't want them too big. And if they are going to be big, you want to make sure that you have the right proportions. And that's actually another one of the principles here. I'm not sure if I've covered though. Structural enclosure, actually, yeah, we do. So structural enclosure includes, basically different types of features, as well as those building facades that give human beings a sense of comfort. Not feeling trapped, because as you can see in this diagram, there's plenty of ways out, but it does give, it kind of provides the feeling of a living room. Basically, it's an outdoor living room. And in those colonnades, you can actually hang out in those colonnades and watch the people. So if you ever been to a lot of very successful plazas, especially through Europe, a lot of their edges happen to be those colonnades where you can be sitting at a table or sitting on some steps in front of a church or such, and just watching what's going on in the middle of the plaza. Oops, hold on. And ideally, that structural enclosure exists within a certain amount of ratio. So I was referring to that before. You don't want your super wide plazas to not have an equivalent and balanced, height. So your floor to height ratio should be between 1:1 and 3:2 floor building ratio. So yeah, it's basically, and when you're on a big car boulevard, say in your city, and the street's really wide, and then you got your buildings, your big box stores and such, and they also have another parking lot in front of them, and they're way far back. That is not good structural enclosure. When you're on a big car boulevard and it's really wide open, there's no sense of comfort. Plus, there's cars flying around at very fast, 50 miles an hour or such. So so basically, human beings, this is just, a lot of psychology goes into this, really do like a sense of enclosure. You don't want it to be too tall either, though, because that does the opposite effect. It can make people feel claustrophobic and feel trapped. So there is a nice balance to be achieved. Keep the center open. So a lot of the most successful plazas do not put something right in the middle. They ideally keep the traffic lanes open. And what I mean by traffic is pedestrian. So as you can see in this diagram, people can walk from one entrance to the other and not be interrupted. any features that are put into the plaza are kind of like in the eddies in between those pathways, so it doesn't interrupt anybody's flow. So you'll notice this if you go ever, walk around Italy, is that, there usually is not a big structure right in the middle. And you can enter into a plaza and look at your escape route across the other corner or across the other way and get there pretty quickly if you truly want to escape. So it's functional in addition to providing a place for social connection. So defined subspaces, a lot of plazas, especially larger ones, really benefit from being kind of subdivided in different areas. Now you do want to keep these areas open and not too crammed with stuff, but it does get too big, subdividing your public spaces can benefit from this. One thing I'd like to say here is that sometimes certain things are appropriate where other things are not. So in this case, defined subspaces might not be appropriate for a particular plaza. You might just want to keep it all the way open, just like some of the examples that I've shown. So, but sometimes if you have a really big area and you don't have that structural enclosure around the edge, it benefits from defining the subspaces. And you could do this in a number of different ways. You could do this with elevation changes, with steps. You can do this with planters. You can do this with seat walls. You can do this with trees. You can do this with, full planting areas. There's different ways of defining these subspaces, and more subtly, even with paving differences. Okay, a couple more. So seating is one of the most important factors for the success for urban plaza. There is fixed seating and there is loose seating. And not only the number of seating, and there's actually equations of how much seating should be appropriate for an urban plaza, but also the configuration of those seatings and how it can really maximize sociability. So some of these, as you can see, are designed in such a way to kind of like capitalize on the adjacency of people and to spur informal social connections. So out of these 15, this is the fifth one. So this is devices for social triangulation. And what this is actually borrowing from William H. White, who I mentioned him earlier. He's one of the biggest researchers in public space research, just to, monitoring human behavior as they move through public spaces. And he was doing much of his research in the 60s and 70s. And he actually defined what triangulation is. And I kind of hopped on it to create a principle from it. But basically, what triangulation is you have two people, and then you have a third object or an event or something happening, a piece of art, a street performer, hot dog stand, whatever. And that third item is kind of this. That creates the social triangulation. Is the third thing that makes two people or more, connect to each other. So you see this, in, Balboa Park. We have street performers. We have, we got music. We got, public arts, and these are all reasons for this. And it could be food carts too. Food carts can actually be devices of social triangulation, even though the principle right before this is food vendors. So having food vendors in public spaces really help them succeed as well. Okay, so we just covered the first one, and in this methodology for design, that was the list of principles, universal principles with some contextual ones a little bit. Just to go back on that last one a little bit, just talking about the triangulation, that is kind of a contextual one. You could actually do community planning and ask people what they would like to see in their public space. So there's an opportunity for something that's a little bit more contextual. So the second item on this list is present a scoring tool to rank existing public spaces for sociability. So this is another big part of the research that I did back in between 2014 and 16. And with those 15 principles, was able to get 62 different possible design recommendations. So 62 design and planning recommendations. So these, I'm not going to go through all these, but basically these get down to actual measurable, quantifiable design interventions. So, you can use this for kind of like going through and evaluating an existing public space. Or you could potentially use this for a new one as well. But for the purposes of this research, I did 6 different case studies and applied the scorecard to those case studies. And just all these different, different design recommendations come directly out of the literature. Some of it might have been massaged by me, but for the most part, it came from existing literature and, and a lot of different references, and a lot of it was, cross-referenced. So very rarely, if ever, did anything conflict. It all built on each other. It's just hard to find all this information in one place. But we got a scorecard right here that can help evaluate and see if it succeeds. So the next step in this process is to do the case study. So apply the scorecard to 6 existing urban plazas, and in this case, 6 different ones throughout America. And this is just to measure if the scorecard works and if all this different research out there really applied, and to see if it matches the success, the measured success, or even the qualitative success of that particular urban plaza. So these were the 6 sites: Post Office Square, Bodecker Park, and Central Wharf Plaza, Canal Park, Charles Center Plaza, and Pete B. Dominici. Post Office Square is in Boston, I think. Well, I'll cover it in a second. And Bodecker Park's in San Francisco. Central Wharf is in Washington, D.C. Canal Park's in Washington, D.C. Charles Center, it's been a while. PB Dominici is in Albuquerque, New Mexico. There was only one that scored in, so out of those 62, there was only one that basically hit the good range, and that is Post Office Square. So basically just divided those 62 different design interventions equally between excellent, good, average, and poor in the ranking table. And so Post Office Square was in the good category. And then we have Pete B. Dominici at the very bottom with only 20 points. So I'm only going to highlight, for the interest of time, I'm going to highlight the top and the bottom ones in this case study process. So the highest scoring one is Post Office Square in Boston, Massachusetts. It used to be a parking garage, an above ground parking garage, multi-level. All the parking was driven underground, and there is a fair amount of offices and some residential around this, so it was a decent location, and a fair amount of pedestrian traffic was in this area. And so to locals, it's a beloved spot. This is actually the design sketch before it was built. And so it's, Norman B. Leventhal Park at Post Office Square. Definitely someplace I want to go to at some point. It has received high praises by professional academics and critics. According to online reviews of the site, the social success of the Square Park is indeed very popular with people on a day-to-day basis. So undoubtedly, the presence of those patterns, having scored relatively high compared to the other ones in the evaluation scorecard, undoubtedly contributed to the project's success. So that would, that makes sense. If it scored highly and it's reported to be highly successful, that really checks out. And this one did receive an ASLA 2014 Landmark Award, and it's called Post Office Square Park because it is kind of like a combination park and plaza in this case, but there is a majority hardscape. It is over 60%. I remember measuring it. It's about 65 to 70% hardscape. Here's just another picture of it. There's that outdoor seating and loose outdoor seating and food vending. Okay, so now for the lowest scoring. The space in front of the Pete B. Dominici Courthouse received a 2-star pilot certification from the Sustainable Sites Initiative's Sites Certification System. The design is notable for its sophisticated water management system and its impressive homage to regional artistic tradition. So in plan view, it does actually look pretty cool. The plaza's geometric design pattern and local materials fit well with the context of the city and the desert aesthetic of Albuquerque. Despite those qualities, though, it only scored 20 out of the 62 points in this particular evaluation. And part of the reason why these 6 case studies were chosen is because in the evaluation by either the ASLA award system or the Sustainable Sites Initiative, these places, their goal was to create social function. So that was one of the criteria by which these 6 case studies were chosen. So it's not just any place that throws the word plaza on it. These places were trying to achieve social function, and that's what they got awarded, partly awarded for. So that was the criteria by which these six case studies were chosen. Just want to make that clear. Well, let me go back really quick. So this was located with no residential density around it, no sense of enclosure. You can actually see in this picture. One monumental building, so it kind of checks off that box, but then it has along the rest of the edge, it's all street. But along that edge, and that's okay. If it's a perimeter block plaza, it's surrounded by street, that's okay, but there is no other, very little sense of enclosure beyond that other than those street trees on on the left and the right there. So it just feels very open, not very cozy and not very comfortable. Plus a variety of other reasons. Just want to just be clear that these are models. These people were placed here. My guess is that there's probably people not hanging out here on a regular basis. So finds of the scoring tool. The principles and scorecard does prove to be a good measure of a plaza's social performance. The evaluation tool may be used to rank existing plazas or to design new ones. So this was pretty accurate as far as as far as the evaluation process. I have all 6 case studies in my research, but I only highlighted these 2. But the reporting that I talked to individual people, went to Yelp reviews, learned about a lot of these different case studies, and did seem to match what the scoring tool score came out of as. So industry awards for social function and let me hit that. Industry awards for social function and the witnessed social performance do not necessarily match. So what I mean by that is what these were awarded for. If there was a social component that it was awarded for, that output wasn't necessarily a match for that. So that's kind of shows how maybe the industry needs a little bit more focus on the actual social function of a public space and not just, like I was listing earlier before, like aesthetics and that kind of thing. So let's get into some examples of some socially successful urban plazas. This is a little bit fun here. So what you see here in front of us is the Piazza della Famiglia in Little Italy, and it was a smashing success. Perfectly located, really well designed, great sense of enclosure, didn't clog up anything in the middle. So really checked off all the boxes. Here are some other really successful plazas. That one's in Poland. The top right is Bryant Park in New York, which has kind of plaza elements to it. And then bottom right is Pioneer Park in Portland, Oregon, where I used to live. That is literally called the outdoor living room of downtown Portland. So, and it is quite, it is quite the place. It's at an intersection of not only a lot of pedestrian traffic, but also 2 lines of the light rail system downtown. So, and a lot of bus lines. So it's just kind of like the nexus, and it was a natural place that when it was located there in the 80s. So, some examples of some unsuccessful urban plazas. So I'll get into this one that you can see on the screen here, but this is the HUD Plaza, which is in front of a civic building in Washington, D.C. It's pretty cool looking. It's kind of iconic. I think they keep it around because it is so iconic and it is kind of beautiful in its own way. But you might notice something else about it. It's quite empty. There is no residential density around it. It is only people going into the office day to day. There is kind of a sense of enclosure, but the seating arrangements are not very sociable. it doesn't have defined subspaces. There's just a whole bunch of things that how it wouldn't really check off. The one on the top right is the Jacob K. Javits Plaza in front of the Federal Building there in New York City. And it also is very wide open. The seating that you see in the foreground is pretty decent, but it doesn't have a lot of the other qualities that would make a plaza very successful. And the bottom right is my own photo from the city called Malmö in Sweden, and it is unfortunate because it's a bike lane. A path goes right through this, and that's like a bike shop right there, and restroom, and there's a train station right there, and it's a good place for a successful urban plaza, but it doesn't just contain a lot of those design elements that make it successful. And this wasn't just me reporting on this. There's locals that I knew that said the same thing. It's like it's always dead. So it doesn't need to be. It could be redesigned. So even in certain places in Europe, plazas aren't necessarily designed the right way. Okay, so a more local challenge is our own Horton Plaza Park here in San Diego. And it's not actually a park, it's an actual plaza. Horton Plaza is a postmodern multi-level outdoor mall that was established in the 1980s. And it's since been kind of slowly dying in terms of its economic vibrancy. But this is an actual plaza called Horton Plaza Park. And it's actually designed by the same people, the same firm that did Pioneer Square in Portland, Oregon. The overall design is, I think it's pretty great, but it doesn't check off some of those other crucial boxes as far as, there's not enough residential density immediately around it. It is a little bit too open. The location isn't the absolute greatest, but there's also other issues with the local homeless population too. And so some of the management, of it is not necessarily to par in order to keep it, accessible to all citizens, not just any one segment of society. And the plan was to just program it like crazy and just have a bunch of events, but it's really hard and very expensive to keep someplace constantly programmed. It should be able to have life on its own on a day-to-day basis, not just with programming. So, literally was destined to operate well, and it will guarantee its success. But the minimum requirement for locating a plaza is not necessarily whether it is already a successful in a successful financial area. They also do not need to be expensive or a highly advanced technological marvel. Piazzas by the hundreds throughout Italy are relatively simple and are home to thousands of Italians every day. This next example is the Piazza del Carmine in Florence. And this one is I think this was in Florence as well. Pretty simple, just kind of open, in these cases paving, but I've been to many piazzas all over Southern Europe that are nothing more than just DG or pea gravel on the ground with maybe some trees on the edge, but really just kind of kept open. And these are dead right now, but during just certain types of times of the day, they can be full of public life. People, the kids playing soccer, or there could be like cafe seating moved outside. So a lot of these really change throughout the day. So what they can be instead, kind of like the ones I just showed you, is one of the main points I want to drive home here is that these could be located in underserved areas to stimulate the economy, not only in places that are already doing economically well, but they could also not only benefit from the stimulation of the economy from all that foot traffic that we were talking about earlier, they could also benefit from the community building. They can be uncomplicated, largely open and empty, like I was showing before. Pea gravel floors, no need for involved lighting, speaker systems, or pavers. These could be added later. Stormwater management systems can be simpler. A lot of times people want to put in the most expensive, most involved stormwater management systems, which is great. It's kind of a showcase of what you can do with it, which is awesome. But they are expensive, and you have management and maintenance is involved. But if you go to like Southern Europe, there's other ways of handling the stormwater other than just making the most space-age stormwater management system. That being said, there is a place for it, and if you have the budget and you can want to highlight it as an educational opportunity, definitely. But the point here is that we simply need more urban plazas, more of these outdoor living rooms for urban communities to connect. And so we don't want expense to be a roadblock to that. So ways to test a concept. So this is going to get into a different part of the presentation, and there's a lot of exciting things that are happening locally, but also worldwide, of how do you kind of test how public spaces work in a particular location. So this is a picture in Athens, Georgia, of Parking Day that I helped organize at the University of Georgia. It was our department submission, and everything you see in front of you is not permanent. It was only there for one entire day, and it was highly successful. All those people that are in here in this view right now are not planted. They all came there on their own accord. People definitely wanted to hang out there through the entire day. So it was a wild success. Some classes actually held their classes there, and it was really great. So what Parking Day is, it's a form of tactical urbanism. Tactical urbanism is a short-term, low-cost, and scalable intervention to catalyze long-term change related to street safety, public space in this case, and other considerations. It warms the public, municipalities, and local businesses to the idea of public space. It's a proof of concept, and it's usually for a limited time. Parking Day is only one day, but in some cases it could be a week or several. Just to kind of test the waters, test its functionality, test its performance, not only with people but also traffic. How cars manage it, that kind of thing. And it's a way of doing it low cost without too much overhead. And like what I was saying before, one of these really great ways of doing it is through the international event known as Parking Day. And this year is September 17th. And if you would be interested in contributing to a Parking Day parklet, by all means, reach out to us, ASLA San Diego. Our contact information will be here at the end of the presentation, and we would love to have you involved. Everybody on this call, and we would like to have organizations do their own parklets. We'll help you market it. We'll help you, go through the steps of establishing these parklets, and so we highly recommend, reaching out to us if you're really interested in making one of these parklets. What do these look like? So these are Parking Day parklets, and they can look like anything. Some of these look a little more simple, a little more complex. They could be relaxing, they can be, playful, they could be educational, they could be artful, creative, what have you. So yeah, it's a pretty great thing. It's pretty fun, and the city of Chula Vista is streamlining a lot of this, the permits for these Parking Day parklets. And something I didn't include is that these are actually built over parallel parking spaces and/or angled parking spaces just for one day. So it's replacing what actually is public space. Parking spaces are technically public space, but they're usually reserved for the parking of a single private automobile. So in this case, you're creating a public realm for these parking spaces for one day, and it's kind of testing the waters and seeing how people feel about it. Another exciting program that's happening right now by the city of San Diego is a comprehensive program to transition the temporary spaces that we've all been experiencing, which is an extension of private dining, from this emergency response to a more permanent program. So with established design and safety standards. So the city of San Diego is kind of making this extension of public life that's been happening during the pandemic into something more permanent. Over the next few months, the City of San Diego's planning department will work closely with the public stakeholders, usually the businesses, to further develop the program. The Spaces as Places proposal will be brought to the City Council for adoption in the fall of 2021. Just make no mistake, this is an extension of the private dining and more permanent. This is not necessarily specifically about public space, but it can be. And it's mostly about the streetscape. It's mostly in the street right away, whereas this presentation has been mostly about actual full urban plazas. But I think we are towards the end here. So the whole point of this presentation is to establish outdoor living rooms that create places for social engagement. And I hope that came across. So we are in the question period if anybody wants to ask any questions, but that was the end of the presentation. I really appreciate everybody being present for this.
We haven't received any questions via chat, but if anybody would like to unmute and ask any questions, please let us know.
That could be a good thing, or I guess I covered everything. Nothing else to ask.
Well, thank you,
Chris.
Yeah.
I just have a quick question.
I'll bring everybody up on the screen so you can kind of see who's hung in there.
Yeah, Juanita has a question. She wanted to ask.
Yeah, I just have a question about parking day. We're actually going to do something with Spruce and Gander because they are our dealer in San Diego now. Is the parklet determined by their choosing of space? Like, do they choose the space, or is the space allotted to whoever wants to participate?
That's a great question. In the case, it can be done by the individual organizations, but since San Diego chapter of ASLA is kind of doing a more bigger county-wide effort, which is not usually the case. Usually it's one organization, one parklet, they focus on their one parklet. But what we're trying to do is go county-wide throughout the entire county. Right now, kind of like our two hubs are in Chula Vista and South Park. And in those particular cases, we actually did do a walk, and we did select the most ideal parklets, because a lot of these people, a lot of these organizations that are doing these parklets are not necessarily landscape architects or even designers, and they might not know what the most ideal locations are. So we're kind of helping facilitate that for them. So we're choosing locations that are really gonna benefit both the parklet, but also the local businesses and the public to, because I mean, you don't want to have these parklets, this is another presentation. I'm trying to remember the part of the presentation that I gave for the webinar. But you don't want these parklets in places that are like too residential or too car oriented, with not any kind of like pedestrian traffic or any storefronts that are fronting them, or too much of a car speed. So we are really helping facilitate that in this particular case. But if an organization wants to choose their own location anywhere in the county, they can go for it. They just need to go through the proper channels to get their permit and that kind of thing. And we're going to help facilitate them in Chula Vista, the municipalities of Chula Vista and South Park. But it's up to the individual organization. It's an either-or situation, or it's not an either-or situation. It can be both. It can be either.
Juanita, I did get a call from a Spruce and Gander rep. So I called them back, tell them to give me another call back, and then we'll go forward.
Okay, good. I guess I'm just trying to space plan what furniture we'll be sending them, and I just wanted to see if there was an actual size requirement for each, or do they choose, they might want to choose something if there's a choice of size.
Well, that you can, so typically in the States, our parking spaces are between like 9 by 18 or somewhere around that range. So, and they can choose one parking space, parallel parking space, or they can do more than one. So it's up to the individual organization. Obviously, if you permit more parking spaces, you have to do more work to fill it and design it. So it's, choose wisely, don't get anything too big, because you just end up, so sometimes less is more in terms of like, it's really being able to pack it in. So there's not necessarily any limit to that, but yeah, the unit is kind of like the parking spaces, whether they are parallel parking spaces or angled parking spaces. So, but these are small, you know, these are not full plazas like, you know, we've been talking about during this presentation. These are nice little testers, but they've always been really successful. You know, when we were doing the one in Athens, it was amazing. Everybody, even city officials, the police, even the meter people in monitors were like saying like, can't this stay? Does this have to go tomorrow? And yeah, we had to take it down at the end of the day, but that's a good sign. You know, if we are getting people responding like that, you know, that's a really good thing.
So Julia, I'm sorry, Juanita, will have probably more information on the parameters of it as we either zero in on Chula Vista, which has been very, very receptive, you know, to what we're trying to do, and if we're going to do one location, according to Chris and Patricia, there are some of the business owners that may not want to necessarily populate those parking spaces, but they may encourage other people to come on out and do that. So that's why we're starting early. I know this is in September, but you know, I said, let's get an early start because we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
So we had one question from Donna. Donna actually signed out. But Chris, if you saw her email or question, it said, did you by chance watch the HGTV hometown series about revitalizing small town Watumka? It was a fun study to watch. Their plaza was a farmer's market and a main commercial street. So was it something you're familiar with, Chris?
No, I unfortunately don't have cable, but but I could look that up. I could definitely look that up. I'd be really interested in seeing, you know, what's great about, you know, their plaza is I would imagine it probably can change over time. So it probably becomes a farmer's market once or twice a week. So yeah, I'd love to check that out. I don't mind checking that out at all.
Now, I'm allowing anybody else to open up their mics if they want to ask any questions. Dave, I know your mic is open. Do you have any questions?
Well, I'd say, look, thank you for being involved in this one. I was a late comer. I got a quick. I'm actually participating from Sydney, the other side of the Pacific. So I know we've met with Chris before, and it was good to hear your presentation. I can certainly relate to Cortona. I went to Cortona. My brother lived there, and that example of the flexibility of space in Italy and Southern Europe is something we're to learn from. But of course, both your culture and our culture is very car dominant. And I guess this is where we can learn from Europe so far. But I thought the point there, Chris, about those spaces are pretty basic, and what they sort of have a framework that allows things to happen. And I guess as designers, and I think I'll take to your point about the way that we award prizes, we've just had our awards last week for the New South Wales chapter of the Australian Institute of Landscape Architects. And you'll be pleased to know, Chris, that one of the things that we talked about in mine, where I work at Sydney Olympic Park, which is going through a massive transformation, that while we didn't take out the award, the Institute of Landscape Architects came up with a special COVID type award response to COVID with pop-up activations, and hopefully that might live on, because I think what you're saying is that when you analyse parks around social success, the way that we judge them professionally around sustainability, and I've got a master's degree in sustainable development, is are we needing to rethink the way that we score and look at the success of the urban space? And I think both United States and Australia, we have similar cultures, the way we use spaces, and both our institutes would be interesting to see with your analysis of what might have won an ASLA award or a CITES award. I'm familiar with those systems. Is it doesn't necessarily score highly if you start looking at social success. And maybe we've got to sort of take on board a different way of judging what should be award worthy.
Yep.
So I think out of COVID has come a different way of valuing space. We all know that we're not travelling, and everyone's been very, like you said, in San Diego, you've predominantly been a tourist place. Sydney's been a very dominantly tourist for international tourists. and locals to travel overseas, suddenly everyone's rethinking about what is a good place and things that are local. So I think whether that's going to change the ASLA and ALA criteria for awards, but I do see some ripple changes coming through. And I thought it was a really good presentation on maybe we've got to rethink the way what we think is a design outcome that's worthy of an award from our peers.
Yep.
I'll leave it there. More as a comment than a question.
And David, what I'd love to offer is our design awards are coming up for a San Diego chapter, and we usually open them up to other, landscape architecture organizations. Would this be something that we can have your members possibly want to enter?
In terms of being on the jury or entering awards, you say?
We allow people to enter awards from outside of San Diego, and then a lot of people are then encouraged to enter awards for projects in San Diego. So I'll send you the background information and let me know whether it might be a good fit.
Yeah, no, that's very good. I think we should give ourselves an award, and I have to thank Juanita and Street Furniture Australia. This knowledge sharing, as we say in sustainability and capacity building, it's really good to say, what's happening across, we've been saying this is possibly the second, but that the webinar that we had, 3 or 4 months ago, Juanita?
That was great.
We think it was, and Tracy, I think you were there. I remember your face.
Yes.
That's a groundbreaking, the first ever chapter-to-chapter knowledge exchange probably on the globe for landscape architecture as a profession. Certainly, it was on a topic, and that's never happened. So again, even though we've patched it a bit late, but it would be good to sort of certainly around awards or. There's a lot of, I noticed, Chris, you did have an Australian example pop up there where my sister lives in Melbourne, the Sun Theatre at Yarraville. So I've seen that actually. In fact, we had a whole webinar on place activation that was led by Melbourne. It was sort of 10 years ago, but certainly either through awards or having more of these webinars, because we learn from you, you can learn from us.
Yep.
And I think it'd be great to get more ALA members talking to more ASLA members.
Yes.
Whether there's going to be people that can contribute to awards programs, but certainly our juries, I know that the way that ALA structures its juries, usually there are non-landscape architects or people outside the chapter that can participate on juries.
That's right. So Donna, Donna, I see you're still on. Did you want to unmute and ask that question of Chris that you put in the chat? Donna, don't be shy. Maybe she stepped away. Bianca, I see your mic's open. Did you have any questions?
Hi, I just want to say thanks so much to Chris for sharing your research on this topic. It's something I've been super interested in. So I have a couple of questions. One, I saw the list, and along knowledge sharing, I saw the list of, Jane Jacobs, William White, and a group of historic figures who have studied this topic. Who are our current people who are studying this topic? I feel like there's you, and there's like where's this knowledge sharing group? I want to be part of this group to talk more about the social spaces, because the thing that's on my someday maybe list to research, I don't know, unless somebody's already done it, and maybe you can answer this question. The effect of urban plazas and public spaces and social cohesion, and how it impacts rate of homelessness, trauma, addiction, gun violence. I feel like there may be a connection, and there is no silver, I'm mixing up my metaphors, but there isn't one thing that's going to fix everything. But if we can take a comprehensive approach, I feel like urban plazas, the third place, our public living rooms, can be part of the solution for even those such serious consequences of modern society.
Certainly. As far as current practitioners, Jan Gehl is still very much practicing in Copenhagen, and his firm. Oh, I have. His firm, Jan Gehl and Associates, just did a multi-public space complex in Christchurch, New Zealand. and it's because Christchurch experienced a big, huge earthquake in 2010, and it kind of like wiped out a lot of their built environment downtown. And in the time that I was living there, in the 6 months that I was in and out of Christchurch, they were building a lot, but not just building haphazardly. It's all according to a brand new plan, and their entire downtown district, kind of anchored around the central cathedral there, was this public space complex, and Jan Gell and Associates were the major consultant on that. And so, one of my chief references was Jan Gell's work. So they are very much up and operating. There are some more other contemporaries, but they didn't make it into my presentation, but I have them. So if I can send you some information. If you, you can see my email there. You can email me, and
Okay,
on the screen. And then we can correspond that way, because there are some contemporaries, at least up till I did my research. There might be brand new contemporaries, but there's, of course, the Project for Public Spaces, which is, that nonprofit that's based out of New York. I've been in communication with them a bit. I would love to go there and visit them at some point. But they got some good principles there too. That applied not to only public spaces like this, but also to waterfronts. And to their success. So yeah, they're a good organization to kind of keep up with. Fred Kent, who is the executive director there, is he's kind of, but not just him, but just all their staff are good people to ping for information about that. And there's also another organization too. I'll have to get back to you on that, but there is another organization about public space advocacy throughout cities. It might not be limited to the United States either, but I'll have to look that up for you.
Okay.
So Chris, Patricia asked a question. Could you please explain the 1-to-1 and 3-to-2 floor to building ratio again?
Sure. Yeah, I probably went through that a little bit too quickly. So there's all these psychological studies. Those diagrams that I was showing earlier actually came out of literature in this regard, where human beings feel a certain level of comfort. And there's a balance. If there is, so the ratio refers to the floor to height of the buildings surrounding that floor, or whatever the vertical structures are. So ideally you want it between 1-to-1, so that's one measure of floor to one measure of height. Of your public space. These also apply to streets. So you want streets to be within a certain ratio range. So the upper end of that would be 2 measures of floor to 3 measures of height. So somewhere in between those 2 measures is a nice comfortable range. Now, when you get it too tight, if you have a much shorter amount of floor to too much height, there is feelings of discomfort from feeling a little bit too trapped. But that's only applied to public spaces and certain types of streets. I absolutely love the very tight little street corridors that go through very ancient parts of European cities. But this is less about actual like alleyways and those kind of little tiny streets. This is more about public space. So and on the reverse would be a really wide car boulevard with those facades of the businesses way pushed back with big setbacks from the right-of-way line, and you have just this big wide desert of a road, of a street. Usually this is associated with lots of people firing through it with their cars, and all those factors contribute to it not contributing to a sense of enclosure. There's a lot of science behind the sense of enclosure and how it can contribute to a feeling of refuge and safety, as well as comfort. And I just touched upon it during this presentation. So ideally, you want to create a sense of enclosure within those ratio ranges. You can have it outside of those ratio ranges, but it's just one way of optimizing your public space. It's not like it's going to not automatically work. It just means it's just one more characteristic that can add to the success of your public space. And we have
another person who's hung in there for the whole presentation, Mr. and Ms. Zhao did you want to ask any questions? Nope. Been shy?
Well, I did want to address that one last, question about the impacts on homelessness. I can add something to that. Jane Jacobs wrote about this in quite a bit of detail. Is that if you create more of a critical mass of pedestrians, you have more eyes on the street. So crime, or at least certain types of crime, are much less in that kind of situation. Overt violence tends to be less in that kind of situation where you have more people. In Europe, there's the whole pickpocketing thing with more density and more tourists and stuff like that. But generally, when you have an increase of public life and all eyes on the street, a lot of different types of crime definitely are on the decrease. Homelessness, that's a whole other issue. Unfortunately, those are things that we have to deal with in particular countries, and it's, for my opinion, it's an economic, systemic, political issue, and it's hard to design solutions around because unfortunately, like even in certain public spaces in San Diego, if any one particular segment of society is taking over the public space, the rest of the community doesn't want to go there, and it's a unfortunate reality.
In regards to homelessness, I was looking at it from going deeper and earlier in the person's life. How did they end up without a home? If they had that third place in their childhood and they had that social fabric in their life, would they have become homeless in the first place?
Interesting. That's
because
that
a lot
like
of
a line of research.
that's what's funny. Is somebody doing this already? Because I want to know if there's.
I don't know anybody that's done it. So that sounds great.
Because lost that thought. But,
it's okay. No, I see where you're going with this. So so I highly recommend. This is a contemporary. His name's Ray Oldenburg. I referred to him towards the beginning of the presentation. He might be retired now, but he was teaching out of the University of Florida, I think, or he was teaching at a university in Florida, and he talks about this in depth in terms of psychological health being directly related to the amount of socialization people receive throughout their childhood, but also throughout their adult lives as well. There is a correspondence between the amount of social isolation to the amount of psychological conditions later on in life. There is lots of research on how regular social interactions contribute to positive mental health as well as physiological health. So there's tons of research on that. But specifically as applied to homeless, I don't know about that part, but for sure, generally to city populations, this is a fact. And Ray Oldenburg is a great place to start. Just the first three chapters will set you off, and then you'll get super fired up. He's one of my mentors, even though I've never met him. But he's the lens that I look at all this stuff with. And he's not even a planner or a landscape architect. He is a sociologist, but his work is cited and looked at by planners and landscape architects all over the world. It's about establishing that third place and increasing obviously the public life, but the social and the psychological health as well.
I'm really glad you shared that, because I started with the Starbucks CEO was my first introduction to the third place.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Yeah.
He wasn't the one that just...
Coffee houses can be third places. Yeah. Cool. I think we addressed everything. Does anybody else have any questions?
I had a quick question for Juanita. I missed what town you are in New Zealand.
No, I'm in Australia. I'm in Melbourne.
Australia. Oh, sorry. Sorry. My sister lives in Auckland, and she's leading a lot of parklet projects. So I was going to connect you guys if that made sense.
Oh yeah, you should. You should. If you want, Bianca and Juanita, I'll share both of your contact information with each other.
Is that okay?
As well as Chris's contact info.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah,
that'd be great.
You can. New Zealand and Australia can travel between each other, right? Can't they?
Oh yeah.
My city just got locked down, but we're open today, so officially, I think. So, yeah, and I do a bit of business in Auckland with Street Furniture Australia. So, yeah.
Cool.
Oh, perfect. I do need to connect you guys.
Yeah. I used to live in Melbourne and as well as Wellington and a couple other cities in New Zealand too. So I haven't been in that part of the world, well, in a while. It's been like 3 years now, but like, yeah, it's a part of the world that I'm definitely feel like it's another one of my homes.
That's so great. Hey, this was great, guys. Any other questions? Nope. Okay.
Well, thanks for hanging on towards the end. Yeah, and this is recorded, so we'll post it up, or Tracy will post it up, and you can share this with anybody else you want to.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to staying in touch with a few of you. This sounds great.
Very excited.
Yeah.
Very nice to meet everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good
Take care.
job.
Thank
Great
you.
job. Bye.
Thank you. Take care.